So what does it mean? Well, the Copa America groups are all filled out. 10 teams from CONMEBOL, 6 from CONCACAF. Herc, as a region, how do you think CONCACAF's going to fare this summer?
Oh, man. Whew.
That is good.
All right.
Optimistic.
Well, let me explain myself. So right now, the best team in CONCACAF is the U.S. men's national team. We would say that, right?
By a significant amount.
By a significant amount. All right. They don't necessarily have the best record against top 20 opposition. Let's go top 20 opposition in this tournament. You're going to have Argentina, you're going to have Brazil, you're going to have Colombia, Uruguay, and Mexico. Okay? You can beat Mexico. You have proven that. What about the other 4? Are you going to beat Uruguay in your group to get out of that and then face, pick your poison, Colombia, who's on a 20-game unbeaten streak right now, or Brazil, who just beat England, by the way, and is in this transitional phase and could be a completely different team come summer? And what about Mexico on the other side? That's a very tricky group. Venezuela, who's got a ton of talent. Ecuador, who are very young and a very good team, very tricky. And Jamaica, who is Jekyll and Hyde. I don't know what to make of them. They could be lights out or a massive disappointment. And then who else? A Costa Rica team that's on the rise, looks different, but how will they compete? Canada in Argentina's group. We could be seeing an all-CONMEBOL semifinal affair if CONCACAF doesn't bring their A game.
Yeah. I would just say it's not going to go well for CONCACAF, right? I will put the U.S. kind of to a side in a separate category. You look at the other 5 teams, far from the best version of Mexico, far from the best version of Canada, far from the best version of Costa Rica, and even if they are getting a little bit younger than they've been. Jamaica could be its best version, but you saw that interview with Leon Bailey. That sounds like a national team headed for a meltdown as opposed to kind of a high watermark later this summer. Panama, you might say, of all the teams, is kind of on the nice upward trend, and then they lay a couple of eggs this weekend. They got worked by Mexico, and we just hammered Mexico. So I don't see any of the teams really as like a lock, even to get out of the group. The only team that I see as like a sure thing from CONCACAF to get out of the group is the U.S. Even Mexico in that group, I don't know that they're a lock to get out. Yeah. The only team that for me is a legit semifinal threat is the United States. And I wouldn't be surprised, Herc, if it was 6 or 7 CONMEBOL teams in the quarterfinals.
The cross worries me for Mexico, because if you go in first place, you're gonna play Brazil or Colombia either way, first or second place. That cross worries me a lot for the U.S. men's national team. Mexico, if you can end up first place, I mean, you're talking about Canada, Chile, or Peru, and you beat one of them, you're in a semifinal. That's very, very. I think that's doable.
Say it's doable. Say it's doable. You trust this Mexican team in a knockout round game against somebody that's already gotten through a group phase? We're talking about quality opposition. That's what I'm telling you, Herc. Mexico may get out of their group.
They could lay an egg.
There's no way I'm picking them.
I'm just saying their cross is easier. And I think that's what really we need to concentrate here. You know, it's who's your opponent in that cross? And I think the U.S. men's national team is going to have a very difficult cross. Doesn't mean they're not a better team. It doesn't mean that Panama isn't a better team. It doesn't mean that Jamaica may not be more of a threat. But I think if you can get out of that group, which I think is very tricky, and people don't realize how tricky it is for Mexico, but if you can get out of that group first place, you've got a shot of making a semifinal.
Yeah, and I think CONMEBOL is going to dominate this. And I know that sounds like obvious to everybody, but if you actually go back to the beginning of U.S. and Mexico being invited into the Copa America, there was a good stretch in the 90s, early 2000s, where you'd always have at least one of them in the semifinal. Mexico played in a couple finals. I mean, that seems to me, outside again of the U.S., who could, I think, make a semifinal in this tournament, just seems to be like a total long shot for anybody.
You got to beat one of those top 20 teams, Seb. Who are they beating? Which top 20 team are they beating? And from CONMEBOL, are you going to beat Argentina? Are you going to beat Brazil? Uruguay?
Argentina and Brazil, separate category.
Who are they beating?
Colombia is the one, because Uruguay you're going to play in the group phase, so you're not playing them in a knockout round. I think the U.S. has a very good shot against Colombia
20 games unbeaten.
At home.
Did you see what they did to Spain?
Yes.
Okay.
Friendly.
Okay.
Friendly.
Okay.
Well, there's been 3 CONCACAF Nations Leagues all time, and the USA has won all 3. There you see Mexico having some success when it came to the Gold Cup, but the Nations League very much property of the USMNT. Herc, there's probably a lot of places we could start, but where do you want to start as far as your keys to why the U.S. was so dominant in this performance over Mexico?
Listen, we could talk tactics, and Greg Berhalter has a lot in this. We got to give him his flowers. He's dominant over Mexico, and we will talk about Greg Berhalter. But can we just start with talent? I think that's the biggest issue here is the talent level in one program and the lack of talent in the other program. And the Mexican national team post-game was talking about that lack of talent. The U.S. men's national team in the game took advantage of that lack of talent. You look at these two programs, and the starting 11 for the U.S. men's national team, 7 of those players played in England, 6 of them in the Premier League, 1 in the Championship. There's 1 in the Eredivisie. There's 1 in Serie A. You know, big teams like Milan. There's players in good moments. And you look at the opponent, and it's sparse. Probably the most informed players doing the best in Europe at the moment. Offensive player, I should say. Santi Jimenez can't even get on the field. And when you look at the two programs and where they're heading, one has over 100 players scattered, littered around, you know, Europe, whatever types of leagues they want. The other, they're screaming to be let go. They're screaming to be sold cheaply so they can start their European adventures. And there's just a stark difference in quality and the quantity of that quality abroad. And I think that's just the most evident thing here. I can't recall a time where the difference in talent between the two was so one-sided in favor of the U.S.
Yeah. Herc, when I saw that this was your answer, I looked at the 211s, and you know this is something we always do at ESPN. We always do it on ESPN FC, the combined 11. And I'm looking through the Mexico 11 versus the U.S. 11. There's not one Mexican player that you say, oh, yeah, he gets in a combined 11. There's maybe 2 guys who you can look at, and you have to make a case for them. You can maybe make a case for Edson, not based on last night against Tyler Adams, but I think you could make a case. And then you could make a case for Santiago Jimenez, but the problem with that is he can't get even into Mexico's 11. He might be the best 9 in both pools, but he's not getting into Mexico's 11. So you have nobody truly in this Mexican team, Herc, that would guaranteed, without a doubt, make a combined 11. When else in the history of this rivalry have we ever been able to say that? And the other thing that's very clear is that both sides know about this talent difference that you're talking about. We heard Greg Berhalter there, right? They're talking about legacy and three-peat before this game. Mexico's talking about where are their guys playing and where aren't we playing, right? That's the excuse attitude that Mexico had coming into this game. You look at what Greg Berhalter and those guys were talking about. They're talking about winning, and you see it, Herc. You see it in how these teams play. I think Mexico has their worst performances against the United States, and I think the U.S. saves their best performances against Mexico, and that's considering in this case, Herc, the U.S. had played an extra 30 minutes in the semifinal that the Mexican team, they didn't have that. So, you know, of all the things that Mexico could have potentially found a little bit of an advantage of in this game, right down to the form coming in off the Jamaica game, even those things didn't play out. And that, for me, is why I'm going a little bit different with my choice. I'm going with the lineup that Greg Berhalter chose, and specifically some of the big decisions that he made as kind of why the U.S. was able to dominate so easily here. Now, the first thing that's obvious, man, is the amount of changes. To make 5 changes in your lineup to the team that you put out in the semifinals, to make 5 changes to a lineup before a final, that's a lot. But it was very much needed based on what we saw against Jamaica. And if you think of the changes that were made, and some of them were obvious, right? You're obviously going to put in Serginho Dest if you've got him available. But they all had an impact. Tim Ream, I would say unexpectedly solid in defense. Serginho Dest, I mean, we saw it in the highlight. There was probably 3 or 4 more clips that didn't make it. That's how good he was. Tyler Adams, Herc, massive risk. A guy you know you can only play for 45 minutes. You start him, so you create an issue for yourself at halftime, and he rewards you with a just unbelievable golazo in the 44th minute. Haji Wright maybe didn't have his best game, but it's clearly the right call to play him after he scores 2. And the biggest decision of all, which is, again, pretty obvious, is Gio Reyna in that starting lineup. He's the difference maker. He gets the goal that clinches. And I think the other thing that's important about Reyna here is he was better for me in the second half than the first. And I don't know if that's down to Gio figuring something out or if that was something that they changed in the locker room at the half, because he was in much more dangerous spots in the second half than in the first.
I think that's it. He was in more dangerous spots. He was operating very, very deep in the first half. And maybe that's by design. Maybe coming and picking that off the center back is by design for Gio Reyna and trying to pick and choose where to operate and maybe launch some of those services. That's what they were going for. But this goal by Tyler Adams, which was a massive, massive gamble, really opened things up for the U.S. men's national team. Listen, it's not crazy to start Tyler Adams. I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to say, why would you start one of the most important players you have? I understand starting Tyler Adams. I think it's wild you start him and you go into it only saying he's only going to play 45 minutes. That's a massive gamble. But this gamble paid off for Greg Berhalter. You said Tyler Adams repaid that trust? Absolutely. And from reports, he was angry at halftime and they got in an argument because he had to come off. But that's where he is today in his minutes count. And the agreement that Greg Berhalter, which I hate these agreements that the U.S. men's national team does with with other club teams. We've seen it before with Dortmund. We've seen it before with Chelsea, et cetera, where they come to terms on the amount of time their players can play. National team, that's your ground. You make the decision. But it worked for him. Tim Ream, you don't play him against Jamaica, which if you think he's your best center back, you have to play him against Jamaica to rest him because he's an aging Team Ream, and it pays off. Though I thought Tim was good with his passing, the passes that worked. A little sloppy in possession. I think he lost like 21 times, but I think Chris Richards wasn't too far off, so there was a little bit by design there. But everything he wanted to do, Greg Berhalter, like he's done versus Mexico, has pressed all the right buttons against Mexico.
All right, what about Gio Reyna? Named the best player of the tournament. Hard to argue that, and probably increasingly difficult at this point, Herc, to argue against his spot in any 11 for the U.S. men's national team.
Yeah, man, I use the example of Christian Pulisic, last go around. It really does remind me of Christian Pulisic when he wasn't playing at Chelsea. These guys, these two, have used the U.S. men's national team as a refresher, a way to escape that dark side of their game, a way to get somewhere where they can be fresh, when they could be lively, where they can have fun and enjoy the game again. And that's what he did here. It's exactly what he did for the U.S. men's national team in another final. There's some crazy stat that we saw thrown out in social media about his game or his goal involvement, the amount of times he's been involved in goals in finals. He's already the all-time leader in that category for the U.S. men's national team. He's 21, Seb. He's 21.
Yeah, it's wild, man. He's going from, I think, like talent to player, right? At least at the international level. When I think of a guy who's talented, I think of a guy who can do the things that Gio Reyna does, and certainly did in this semifinal and final, but maybe can't do it consistently. He's now doing it consistently with the national team. It's still to be determined if he can go from kind of talent to player at the club level, but at the international level with this team, he is very clearly, Herc, that guy. And I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway for me here from Gio Reyna. He did this with 80 minutes of playing time at the club level in 2024. The last time he played more than 10 minutes in a game was February 10th. That's a month and a half before the start of these two games. Once he gets his club sorted, man, forget what he's going to do for the U.S. He's going to kill CONCACAF. He's going to absolutely destroy it.
Yeah, it's what he does at the club level. Listen, Christian Pulisic went from a very, very bad situation at Chelsea where he was on the outs to a very good situation where he's now doing very well, and he's an important piece for AC Milan. I've got no doubt Gio Reyna can do the same. Use the U.S. men's national team to get your confidence back up, get yourself where you want to be, and go back to your club situation and figure it out. Get somewhere where you fit, where you play. And this kid plays, the stats are going to come with it.
That's right. And don't forget, people are watching during an international break. Greg Berhalter said it before. One of the reasons he brought Gio in, he used the word showcase. Anybody that watched the U.S. that's a club personnel director right now, they saw a showcase of exactly what Gio Reyna can do. A little bit further up the field, Herc, we have the number 9. Where are we now after these two games on the nonstop question of the U.S. number 9 depth chart?
Can I be honest? Does it matter? And just bear with me for a second, because let's go back to when Greg Berhalter started with the U.S. men's national team. Who was his starting 9? Josie Altidore. Let's go back to when the World Cup qualifiers started around. Who was his starting 9? Josh Sargent. Let's go back to who saved his job. Who was his 9? Ricardo Pepi. And then somewhere along the lines, Jesus Ferreira comes in. And then it's Haji Wright in the biggest game versus England. Arguably the biggest game of your World Cup versus England. It's Haji Wright. And then it's, again, we're throwing a Brandon Vasquez into the mix. And there seems to be this rotating door when it comes to the 9, and I don't really think it matters. And now we have Balogun, and I don't think it matters. And the reason is because in this system, and I've said it many times before, the 9's not going to score you goals. That's not his job. That's not what he does. They have to facilitate for the goal dangerous wingers. So for Greg Berhalter, I don't think it matters on who's the 9. I think Greg Berhalter is going to ride who he thinks either has the hot hand or is going to be the best suited against this opposition to make guys like Gio Reyna better, to make guys like Christian Pulisic better, to make guys like Timothy Weah better. This 9 in this system is a system player, and that sort of worries me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of number 9 by committee, to borrow like an American football term, right? When they do running back by committee, whoever's the hot hand. The one thing that I think is kind of the best evidence of that is how quickly things can change, right? Haji Wright was pretty clearly, according to Greg Berhalter, the 4th best forward, right? When this roster was named. That's why he left them off and then calls him in when he has the Josh Sargent injury. If that guy can go from 4th to starting the final, that means there's a lot of space for like up and down movement in that number 9. And I think right now, Herc, you got to say Haji Wright is in that pole position, especially if we consider, well, Herc, there's no more games, right? At this point, all you're going to really have to go on with these guys is club form. I'm not about to bet against Haji Wright and think that he's suddenly going to start, to go cold at Coventry. If he stays hot at Coventry, based on what we saw this window, how, when we get to those games in June, are you not starting him?
Listen, there's no buts from me on that. I'm not the guy that said Balogun's the clear best forward or 9 in this team or in this pool of players, and there's no question about it. So why wouldn't you play your best 9 if the gap is so evident? I don't think it's that evident. I do think there's a competition. I just don't think Greg Berhalter has a pole position leader in that competition. I really do think it's a system, and within that system, the opposition, the profile of striker, and I know you've heard this before, really comes into play.
All right, odd man out come June. If you're only taking 3, who's your odd man out of the 4?
Dude.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I want to keep Ricardo Pepi in there because of what he's done in the last, 10 games that he's come off the bench for the U.S. men's national team. He scored goals. He's got 7 goals in like 10 games, 5 of those off the bench. But he's not playing club football. Balogun's not playing well at the moment. He is playing club football, just not well. Josh Sargent, you can't keep the kid from scoring when he's healthy, but he's not healthy right now. That's a difficult one. I don't think you can make that call now. I really think it's hot hand when it gets there, and you go with the 3.